Hello, welcome to another Sunday show. This is slightly different, really, because a number of people have written to me over the last months, as you can well imagine, usually from Britain. And it's always the same question, really. They're very worried about the lack of foods in supermarkets and so on, the fact they can't get their favorite things, and especially older people, very worried about whether with the shortage of food they can remain healthy, and also whether the shortages are going to get worse, and what to do if they do. Well, I'm not going to comment on the geopolitical policies in the world, but I think there's a fair chance life is going to get worse, and I think there's a fair chance that it will get worse, especially next winter. So I think it is a good idea to be prepared. But rather than rush out to the store, and I know people don't like the word stockpiling, so we'll leave that word to one side. I think there are things you can accumulate over the coming weeks that actually would enable you to eat healthily. Now, I'm not going to talk about meals. I'm not qualified to start showing you how to cook a risotto or something like that. I could get Barbara Cox on, I suppose. Perhaps we do it for another show. But most importantly, I'm just really going to talk about perhaps the 10 things you should have in your cupboard, that maybe a few more, that in principle could keep you healthy and could nourish your body and nourish your gut bacteria, because they're one and the same thing. And I might talk about some other little things at the end you might have on the side, just to be less concerned about the future, let's put it that way. So I'm going to try and show you things. So the first thing I would honestly say is, and I've got all these things anyway, but is whole black or whole brown organic rice. So this is whole black organic rice, and it's got huge benefits because it's whole and it's nourishing and it's a carbohydrate and so on, but it's got lots of B vitamins and it's got anthocyanins in it. So these will protect you from things like cancer. That's what anthocyanins do. They're in the purples of aubergines and things like that. So that's number one. I would not just get rice, I would get whole black organic rice or whole brown organic rice. The other thing, you may be allergic to gluten. Well, okay, I'm sorry, but I would get in whole wheat pasta. And again, you can store this just like the rice. You can store it for ages in the cupboard, in a cool cupboard. Gone are the days of having larders. I know that's a bit old-fashioned of me. I remember when I was a kid. So I would certainly have those things in the larder for an emergency. And then also for number three or number two, I would have whole rolled oats. I would keep it. This is a plastic container from somewhere else, but it's really solid, doesn't let the air in or ants or anything like that in. These are whole rolled organic oats, and they are gluten-free. Oats are gluten-free. Unfortunately, in Europe, we tend to store them in silos that have had wheat in. So you need to actually, I'm afraid, look for the word gluten-free on there if you really want to insist on being gluten-free. The next thing I would go for is lentils. Now, lentils, what actually happened was when one of the first questions came in, as you may or may not know, I live in France as well. I live in Thailand, but I live in France as well. And I've always been impressed by the way the French store things. They're the only people I know who cut ducks up and sort of cook them and stuff them in a jar for posterity. And things like lentils, it's easy to think they're carbohydrates, but actually we got 38% of our protein in 1900 from pulses, legumes, as they would say in America. So it's pulses, it's red kidney beans, peas, broad beans, and things like that. But you get a lot of pulses that are dried, and you only have to soak them overnight, or in this case, you can boil them for 25 minutes, skim off the top, it's phytic acid, and you're getting a serious source of protein and carbohydrate all in one, and huge levels of B vitamins and so on. So pulses are a really good thing to have in the cupboard, and they don't go off. You can keep them for emergency. All these are in my emergency cupboard, by the way, downstairs. I wanted to put too fine a point on it. The next thing I would say, and I know people will be concerned about this, is I would have cans of things. So here is cans of tomatoes. Tomatoes very good for things like lycopene and so on. But tomatoes are a fruit, as you know, not a vegetable. But I would also, people say, oh, what about the white lining? Well, we're talking about you getting ready for perhaps just a 6-month period of concern. Let's put it that way. And I would have cans of sweet corn. I would have flageolet, another pulse that's very common to have canned in France. So I have things like that, and I would put things that can actually nourish you in the cupboard from those. So there would be my area there. And to stick with cans, I would have canned fish more than anything else. So here's a simple 4 packs of tuna full of protein. This is in spring water rather than sea water or saline water or so on. So I would keep things like, you can have sardines if that's what you like, and mackerel and so on, but I like tuna. So I'd have cans of fish. Now, you might say, well, why is he talking about cans all the time? Well, because I'm slightly concerned that we might not have electricity at times. So I've actually got a power generator, and I've got some diesel fuel so I can keep the house running. But I'm not going to guarantee that my freezer is going to be running. So I've done all this list without the use of a freezer. I'm actually thinking of rural France and how they store their food, but most importantly, how we used to store our food in larders as a kid. So that's where where I started all this. And the other thing the French do really well is they pickle things. They put things in jars, so you can get things. This is artichoke hearts. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't go and buy half a dozen healthy products like artichoke hearts, very good for the liver and so on. And keep those in the cupboard too. You might have to have a big cupboard by the time you finish, by the way. So that's 5 areas, I think, really. Now, the other thing, of course, my mother used to do, and the French really do a lot of, is they make really good quality jams. And you can buy jams that really are just sugar and puree, but actually are big chunks of fruit. And the other thing that I have to hand is I have good quality honey. And this, of course, is Manuka. This is level 50. This has got very high levels of bacteria and so on. And, whole wheat bread, if you can get it in our times of trouble. And the use of Manuka honey would be a really good nourishing thing to do. It would give you bacteria and so on. The next thing I've got is bags of nuts and seeds. Now, I might sound a bit odd, but we've got macro near us now. And you can go in there and you can buy, these are pistachio nuts and walnuts, and we have almonds and so on. And so I've always got 10 of these. Anyway, snack nuts when I'm doing PPs and things like that, as my patients have noticed. But these are really good for you. And again, you can store them for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months, and they won't go off. Just keep them somewhere cool. The other thing that is really important for your health, and I've just got an example, these are red onions. So number 8 on the list of 10, I would have red onions. I would have garlic. I don't have an example here, but in France, we buy literally garlics, and they're all tied up in a long line, and you've probably got 10 of them in there. And you can keep them for 3, 4 months if you just choose to have a little bit of garlic, onion. Very good at purifying the blood, good for the kidney, good for the liver, and so on. So these are very health giving. Garlic, as you know, actually can deal with lots of bugs in the body, bad yeast, and so on, and certain bacteria. So garlic would be a really good thing to use. And then I'm sounding like I am very French, and perhaps I am. Then my next one would be a selection of things. I would get, honest to goodness, olive oil, and I would make sure it was first pressed, and I would make sure it was organic. And people ask me, well, how can I tell those nasty Italians haven't muddled it up with seed oil or ordinary olive oil and so on? Well, if you drink some, if it's proper olive oil, first pressed, you will get a very strong peppery taste at the back of your mouth. And that just shows the quality of the olive oil. And I would also add to it things like black pepper I would have in the cupboard, because piperine is very good against a number of illnesses like cancer. I would also have cloudy apple cider vinegar. As you see, this is half full because I use it every morning. I add lemon to this in the morning, but let's suppose we can't get lemons. So you can have a tablespoon of that every day, and you can use the two together if you want to. You don't have to have balsamic. And the other thing I would get is a few pots of honest to goodness herbs. So this is rosemary from Provence, but you can get dried herbs. Why not? They actually will do a very good job for you and your health. So that's the sort of area I would be in. And the last thing, I haven't got an example of at the moment, but I have a very good friend in Reims, and he has a wonderful, wonderful 5-story house and a big, big basement. And he needs the basement because he happens to be a champagne broker, a wine and champagne broker. And he's got something like 5% of the world's champagne market. So he makes a few bob. But most importantly, in Reims, he just about 5 years ago took the bullet holes out of his wall, because where he is for about 100 years, it's more to do with his father and his father's father. The Germans overran the place about every 20 years. And he took me down the cellar one day to get some wine, and there was a rack on one side. And he said, we have a saying, he said, in France, he said, if you're in trouble, you come to your cellar and you have a big ham, and the legs of ham used to hang on the hooks at the side. And all you need is a very hard cheese. I mean, something like Parmesan, which if it's real Parmesan from Italy, is raw. It's been kept anyway for about 10 months. It will last you 6 months minimum, maybe longer. And it's a hard cheese and crumbles and so on. So a ham and a cheese, and he did say, and all you've got to have with it is a bottle of red wine. But I think the other thing that you really need to go and buy yourself and keep for emergencies is half a dozen bottles of water, because you can't guarantee you're going to get water. Now, I know there was a panic in Britain on loo rolls. I would just say there are perhaps some other things you might have in your cupboard. I would always, especially if I lived in England, I would have vitamin D3 with K2 in it. I'd have a supply of that. I'd have 3 or 4 months worth of vitamin D3, K2, because you need to keep your vitamin D levels topped up. If you haven't got cancer, you probably only need 2,000 international units, or perhaps take a 5,000 international unit level, perhaps twice a week of vitamin D. If you've got cancer, then you need to take it more often, 4 or 5 times a week, if not every day. The other thing I would get is an honest to goodness fish oil, perhaps 1,000 milligram fish oil. I take at least one every day. I think the third thing you could do is you could get a liquid trace mineral. So you can get a bottle, and it seems like it's very small, but you're only putting like 5 drops in your juice in the morning or in your water. It tastes a bit metallic, but it's going to make sure you get, in troubled times, a lot of ordinary minerals and a lot of rare minerals like boron and so on. You could buy a bottle of magnesium, you could buy a bottle of zinc, and just alternate, do 1 pill one day and 1 pill the next day. You could do that. I have written about this. I would probably I have got, in fact, downstairs in the fridge, a bottle of potassium iodide. So if someone gets silly with a nuclear weapon down the road, you can at least take potassium iodide and protect yourself. And I would have a bottle of iodine in the house. So I'm quite keen that you would have things like Savlon, perhaps, to heal any cuts. You would have iodine, which you can put on top of your skin if you cut your hands to prevent you get infections in it. I would also, just in case you're really short of water and so on, I would make sure I had half a dozen packs of wet wipes. Very, very simple. I would also have candles. I would also have matches. You don't have to do this, but we've got, as I said, an electricity generator that runs on petrol. And anyway, apart from the normal systems, we have a little gas cooker out the back for the maid's house. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? I would also have some aspirin in hand. I would have some paracetamol. And as you know, I like it very much. I can get it out here. I would have ivermectin. Ivermectin's been shown now categorically to kill all manner of viruses. Are you listening, Dr. Fauci? And I would also have some oregano oil and perhaps some artemisinin in my cupboard. So that's basically where I would be. I'm as I said, I can't comment on the world's geopolitics. The last time Britain was involved in a war, if you remember, the Americans came to our rescue with baked beans, and corned beef. So I've deliberately left those to one side, and I hope you prefer the things that I've chosen. In fact, for me, the one thing I would probably have is black olives around, just as my little luxury. But also they've got probiotics in them, so they're going to give you bacteria as well. So the essence is on having bacteria, like apple cider vinegar and manuka honey and things like olives, and also having whole food. If it's going to go in your mouth and you haven't got much food, at least make it whole and make sure it nourishes you and it nourishes your gut bacteria. So that's, I hope, a quick view of what I've got in my cupboard, and you could have in yours. I remember at the start of the pandemic, I wrote an article on what I was taking to try and avoid getting COVID-19. And somebody who watches us or listens to us or reads my stuff wrote to the Sun, and the newspaper rang me up and started saying, "You're recommending all these things to other people." I'm not actually. I'm saying this is what is in my cupboard, and they were what I was taking to try and not get COVID-19. I did get COVID-19, but as most of you know, I took ivermectin, vitamin D, azithromycin, and zinc. So fortunately, I got over it. So there you go. So I'm talking about nourishing foods to nourish you and to nourish your bacteria if times get really tough. And so I hope you benefited from that little talk, and I hope it was worthwhile. Okay, all the best. I'll see you soon. Bye.